Right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to be talking about a very exciting topic about STI diagnostics and the regulatory landscape. And we've got some incredible speakers with us today. We're just giving people a minute or two to join. And so we're really happy to have a number of you with us today so we can share some really important content, introduce some pathways and opportunities to increase access to STI diagnostics. And I just want to, thank Allison and AVAC for really running the logistics and setting up this webinar. And it's been so great to partner as WHO and AVAC on this. And so we will be sharing all this content through the AVAC website and also through WHO channels as well. So all the slides, everything will be shared with you in the coming weeks. If you have questions about any of the content, feel free to reach out to us as well. We're definitely available. But without further ado, I know we have a lot to get through in this webinar, and I'm really pleased to really kick things off here and hand over to my colleague, Dr. Remco Petters, who's the medical officer for the STI Care and Treatment Program at WHO. He's got vast experience on STI diagnostics. So Remco, over to you to kick us off with some framing remarks.
Thank you, Cheryl, and good day, everyone. My talk is going to really try and set the scene for the rest of the presentation. So I've got a short 3-slide talk to really provide context to why we are here today and why it's really important to have this webinar and to understand the regulatory pathways in the context of accessibility. So just to highlight for those of you who may or may not be very aware of the STI field and what's going on, if we think of STIs, in particular the bacterial ones, we have a large burden globally with more than 370 million new cases each year. So this means every day there's 1 million new cases of STIs globally, just between chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, and trichomoniasis. And in other words, there's a substantial burden out there. The case numbers are really out there. And to address this burden, the WHO has put together a global health sector strategy, which is combined with those of HIV and hepatitis. And this document really aims to bring together strategies to reduce the burden of STIs globally and mitigate the health impact. So this STI global health sector strategy has the objective of ending STIs as a public health concern by 2030, which means we need to go from 374 million to less than half of those within the next 5-6 years. And the plan that's been put together in this strategy includes 5 main strategic directions, and there's a number of priority actions linked to these. So 5 directions with 25 priority actions to really try and tackle this burden of STIs. And when you zoom in on these priority actions, most of these actually require diagnostic testing, in particular for syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and trichomoniasis. So diagnostic testing is really an essential part of the global health response to STIs. And the reason or the objectives of including these diagnostic tests in these strategies is the provision of high-quality care and improved case management. So really moving away from syndromic management to etiological treatment of STIs. Strengthened services for sexual partners. So this could be through targeted partner services or through partner testing or self-testing. Prevention of vertical transmission, so reduced transmission, in particular of syphilis from mother to child. Screening priority populations is an important part of this strategy. And last, the identification and management of cases to avoid further spread of drug resistance. So without having diagnostic tests for chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis, we are not going to get to any of the targets in this global health sector strategy. And it means that diagnostic testing for us is really an essential component of the global STI response. Now, the question is where we are and why we're here today. So first of all, I think it's important to note that we do have a strategic plan at the global level. Some countries have strategic plans that include STI testing as well. and the policies are in place in many places. So on that part, strategic plans, national policies, we're actually doing well. Those are in place. Clinical management guidelines, another important piece of the puzzle, is in place in most countries. So most countries have clinical management guidelines. The WHO released a new version of treatment recommendations and clinical management guidelines earlier this year. So again, on the clinical side, clinical management side, the guidance is in place to advance STI diagnostic testing. And then last but not least, these diagnostic tests are becoming more and more available. So we started off with syphilis testing and syphilis rapid testing a couple of years ago in the introduction of the syphilis rapid test, syphilis dual rapid test. But an increasing number of rapid tests is becoming available. So it gives us opportunities both in the lab and at the point of care to really start thinking about implementation of these diagnostic tests. And a lot of these have been developed on the backbone of COVID. And when you look at the diagnostic landscape at the moment, there's at least 30 and probably more diagnostic tests in the early or middle stages of evaluation. So without a doubt, within the next couple of years, we're going to have a number of new, hopefully rapid point of care tests for STIs available. And this brings an important question around regulatory pathways, quality assurance, and quality insurance. And how can we make sure that the tests that we are using are performing well and meet the standard requirements? So an important part there is for regulatory pathways. And often these are seen as a barrier, I think. They're essential, but they're often also seen as a big beast that is difficult to tackle. Might be a barrier to scale up or even to develop novel tests. So the purpose of the webinar today is really to provide insights in these regulatory pathways, what they mean, what they entail, and really provide a tool to facilitate applications and engagement with these regulatory procedures. So we're going to have talks today from the WHO PQ team, from the ERPD team, and then there is national level talks as well. And really the objective here is to facilitate procurement and implementation of novel tests at the country level. And ultimately, of course, the goal here is to really make a consolidated effort in reducing the burden of STIs globally. So I'm very excited with this webinar today. I think it's an amazing lineup of speakers. And I'm going to hand back to you, Cheryl, to move us forward.
Excellent. What a great way to start things. So as Remco said, we're going to dive into the next phase of our webinar, and I'm going to hand over to Dr. Susie Braniff, who's representing the WHO pre-qualification of IVDs and assessments team. Susie, over to you.
Thanks so much, Cheryl, and thank you to the organisers for the opportunity to talk about pre-qualification with you all today. We are very excited that we're bringing more STIs into our pipeline. So just some general information about the purpose of pre-qualification. We are not regulators at WHO in the PQ team, but we do quality assurance assessment of IVDs for member states, and we share that information with them. So the aim of pre-qualification is to promote and facilitate access to safe, appropriate, and affordable IVDs of good quality. You can see in the blue boxes on the screen at the moment, these cover the different areas of IVDs that are currently eligible for pre-qualification. It doesn't cover all the types of IVDs that people need, but we focus on IVDs for priority diseases, and we consider their suitability for use in resource-limited settings as part of our assessment procedure. The blue boxes you'll see don't include many STIs, but the scope of pre-qualification continues to expand. So you can see down at the bottom in Q4, we're bringing on a couple of other types of IVDs, but I guess the big news that's important for everyone who is part of this webinar is what's coming in 2025. And that's where we're going to include STI diagnostics, both molecular tests and rapid diagnostic tests for chlamydia, gonorrhea, and trich. So with the outcome of pre-qualification, if the product is successful, then it will be listed. It goes on a list on the WHO website. At the moment, we have 114 different IVDs pre-qualified, and you can look at which products they are by using the link that I've included in the slides. So just to give you a bit more of an understanding of how we do this quality assurance assessment, one of the key things that we make in the pre-qualification team are our PQ Technical Specification Series, or TSS documents. We develop these documents in alignment with relevant international and national standards, with information available in the literature, and also with regard to best practice for the use of diagnostic tests. To develop the TSS document, we conduct a consultation with our colleagues in the relevant WHO program, but we also invite external experts so we can make sure we have the latest information and a good understanding of how these tests are currently being used in the field, and also what's needed from these tests so that they're effective in the different public health areas. Sometimes we have some deviations in the information that we ask for that are a little different from what some regulatory agencies will ask for. Sometimes there's a few extra requirements, and these are normally related to us establishing the suitability of the product for its use in a resource-limited setting. These TSS documents have been tailored to a specific pathogen or type of assay. The requirements that we list in the documents have been designed to address the needs of member states, particularly with consideration of low and middle income countries. And there are also requirements that relate to general performance characteristics. These TSS documents summarize the minimum performance requirements for that product to become pre-qualified, and they're there to establish the performance validation criteria that we expect the manufacturers to be able to meet. And they also contain appropriate reference methods, and we give information about when we need to know what reference materials were used by the manufacturer to establish the performance of the product. We make these documents available, they're publicly available on our website, and we hope that they clarify for manufacturers what the PQ requirements are. But when we're conducting the assessment of the manufacturer's information, our assessors also use this as a key document so that they're clear on where a product needs to be in order to be pre-qualified. So in the blue box on the side are some documents that we are currently preparing, and they are the new documents, the TSS, that will cover the STI products. We've conducted our consultation with experts, we've produced a draft, and very shortly we'll be putting the drafts for these 3 documents on our website so that they're open for public comment. And that means stakeholders, manufacturers, people who work in laboratories. You are free to read through the document and add your comments, and we will take them into consideration before we finalise these 3 new TSS documents. While I'm talking about our documents, I thought I'd mention another group of documents that our team also prepares. They're called the Technical Guidance Series. So it's a little confusing, the names are similar, but these are the TGS as opposed to the TSS. The purpose of these documents is they cover a broad range of different areas that are important for a manufacturer to consider when they are validating their product or preparing the information they need for their pre-qualification dossier. They cover a number of different topics, such as how do you establish the stability of an IVD, the principles that you should consider when you're designing your performance studies, test method validation, what information needs to go into your IFU, etc. Now, these are different from the TSS because they're not requirements for pre-qualification. They're guidance or recommendations. So pre-qualification for IVDs has been running for a decade now. So the team has learned a lot of lessons about common mistakes that get made and what's really important for us to establish the quality of an IVD. And we've tried to put these lessons learned into the documents so that manufacturers have a resource to help them when they are designing their own studies. So the pre-qualification application process begins with the manufacturer submitting a pre-submission form. So this is available on our website, and I do have the web link at the end. I'm going to keep referring to it. The pre-submission form collects information about your IVD and helps the team understand if it does fit the eligibility criteria of what can currently be assessed for pre-qualification. At that time, once we have your information, we will reach out to you and organise a pre-submission meeting so that we can get on a teleconference with you and discuss your product. There we will explain the assessment process and also answer any questions that you may have about the TSS, for instance, or about the performance evaluation that we conduct as part of the pre-qualification assessment. Once we have done our pre-submission meeting with you and we've confirmed with our team that it's in scope, if we decide to prioritise your product, we send you a letter, and that's your invitation to send your product dossier to us. Then it goes into the screening phase, and once it's complete, into the assessment phase. Once we've prioritised your product, we will also get in touch to talk about the performance evaluation and what the manufacturer needs to do for that to happen. And our colleagues in the site inspection team get in touch with the manufacturer to start scheduling the site inspection. So these things all happen in parallel once we've prioritised your product. I will mention that we offer both a full assessment, which includes the site inspection, the dossier that meets TSS requirements, and the performance evaluation. We also offer an abridged assessment. So where a product has already gone through a stringent regulatory assessment successfully, then we reduce the amount of information you need to share with us in your dossier so that we're not assessing something that's already been assessed by a stringent regulatory authority. And the site inspection will also be of a limited scope. And if you have an MDSAP certificate, that may mean that only a desktop assessment is needed for the site inspection component. I just put this flag up to remind myself that we are planning some process changes to the way we conduct our assessment. We are trying to find efficiencies where we can, and we've developed a slightly rearranged version of how we conduct our assessment. We'll be making that public in the next quarter 4, which starts tomorrow. So sometime in the next few months, we will put that information on our website and invite comments from stakeholders, which includes IVD manufacturers. Okay, so I will spend a few minutes talking about those 3 main components of the pre-qualification assessment. The product dossier assessment is where we look at the manufacturer's information about their product. We ask subject matter experts to go through the product dossier and see if there is sufficient evidence that that product meets those TSS requirements so that it can be pre-qualified. The expert will analyse the relevance of the data provided in the product dossier, in particular making sure that it is product specific. And they're looking for reliable data that supports the manufacturer's claims of the quality, safety, and performance of their product, and that appropriate and well-designed validation studies have been conducted. Looking through the dossier, our experts are expecting to see complete accurate and consistent data about that product, from its initial design through to how it's been validated and its routine manufacture, the way that the manufacturer controls the quality of the product being produced, and how they monitor the product once it's on the market to make sure it's performing. Our experts are also looking very closely to see if those TSS specifications have been met, and has the manufacturer considered the use of their IVD in resource-limited settings. So the way the review process works, once you've been invited to submit your product dossier, that comes to WHO and we screen it for completeness. If it looks like anything's missing, or if we're having trouble finding files, or if it's not in the correct format, we'll come back to you and ask you to correct that. And we give you 2 opportunities during the screening phase to give us a complete dossier that's ready for technical review. Once we reach that stage, we send it to a technical expert, and they will go through all of that information. They'll use a checklist provided by us that makes sure that they have seen that all of those technical specifications have been addressed and that the requirements have been met. Once the expert has completed their review, they send their report back to us, which tells us which requirements are met, and if there are any that it's unclear, if clarification's needed, or if it looks like the study that's been performed is not sufficient. And we will prepare a letter for the manufacturer inviting them to submit a corrective action plan on how they will meet or satisfy those deficiencies that we have noted. Again, we allow 2 opportunities for the manufacturer to submit corrective action plans to supplement their product dossier. And at the end of this process, we will make a decision on whether the dossier meets requirements for pre-qualification. It's important to note that we can allow some extensions for manufacturers if they need more time for their corrective action plan to show they meet the requirements, but we do put a cap of 6 months as the maximum extension time. This is trying to make sure that the dossier review process does not take too long, and we know that IVDs can change over time. We want to avoid the situation where changes take place while the product's in the assessment phase, and then we have to go back and reassess information. The performance evaluation component of pre-qualification is an independent verification of the performance of the IVD that's been submitted. During that evaluation, the assay will be challenged with a focus on its use in a resource-limited setting, and also within the context of any relevant WHO guidelines for that assay type. A standard PQ protocol has been developed for each of the types of device that are currently in scope, and it can include analytical, clinical, and operational performance components. The dataset that is generated during the performance evaluation is intended to complement the verification and validation data submitted by the manufacturer in their product dossier. And currently it takes place either in a WHO collaborating centre or a designated performance evaluation laboratory. When you are applying to PQ, you'll see that the manufacturer has the option of either letting WHO do all of the arrangements for the performance evaluation, and in that case, WHO will cover the cost. Or if the manufacturer prefers, they can reach out to one of our performance evaluation laboratories directly and schedule the performance evaluation with them. If you choose this option 2, then the manufacturer covers the cost and comes up with the contract with that laboratory to perform the testing. The manufacturing site inspection is conducted by a separate team within the WHO pre-qualification unit, and they will arrange to come out on site where the product is being manufactured. They are looking to see evidence of a fully implemented quality management system that is meeting the requirements of ISO 13485. They will also be having a look at documents to see if risk management meets ISO 14971 requirements. They'll be considering whether the robustness of the product is suitable for WHO intended settings and users. And they'll also be assessing whether it looks like the site has the capacity to ensure reliable delivery of quality product should that product become pre-qualified. So our pre-qualification decision requires that all three areas of the assessment, the dossier review, the site inspection, and the performance evaluation meet the pre-qualification requirements. We also conduct a labelling review, and this crosses all three areas. It's to make sure that the information that's given to the end user in the instructions for use and any labels on the product is consistent with the performance that we've seen during the assessment and is appropriate for the intended user. Once a product has been found to meet our pre-qualification requirements, we add it to our PQ list and prepare a public report, which is a summary of the assessment of the product. At this point in time, the IVD is eligible for UN procurement, and it is also eligible to use the collaborative registration procedure, the CRP. I'll only mention this very briefly because my colleague Agnes will be talking about this a little bit later and with much more detail. But basically, this is where we aim to accelerate country registration of pre-qualified IVDs. We've put these IVDs through a very robust and thorough assessment, so we have confidence in their quality. And we hope that by sharing the information we learned about the product during the assessment with national regulatory authorities, we can speed up their decision-making with regard to whether they would like to register the product. This process is voluntary for manufacturers of pre-qualified IVDs. It's important that product sameness is guaranteed if the manufacturer wants to use the CRP. We make sure that any data that's shared with the NRA is done so in a confidential manner. And we ask that the NRA reaches their decision about market authorization within 90 days. So under the CRP, we would share the dossier review report and also any change request reports if that's relevant to the product, the site inspection report, and the performance evaluation report. So I have rushed you through pre-qualification quite quickly. So I wanted to finish up by showing you our webpage and give you the address for that. All of the information I've talked about in much more detail is available for you to refer to there. One last thing I'll mention is this year we've made a big effort to do webinars more frequently so that we can keep our stakeholders and manufacturers up to date with what's happening in PQ. Any webinars we've already done, you'll be able to find links to, so you can listen to them if you think the topics are of interest. But before the end of the year, we're planning to also have a webinar about change requests, regulatory reliance in PQ, and I thought we might have quite a few new manufacturers or manufacturers new to PQ in the audience. We're planning in the end of October to do a session on how to apply for PQ. We also conduct regional workshops for IVD manufacturers. We did one in Africa with some of our colleagues and stakeholders back in July, and we have one upcoming in Asia. It will be held in Jakarta in January Q1 2025, and registration is currently open for manufacturers based in Asia to join that regional workshop. And once again, all the information is on the website. So I will wrap up there, and thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to take questions during the Q&A session at the end. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Susie, for a really great summary in terms of the PQ overview and so much really great detail. I think we're going to come into questions at the end, but I encourage people to enter their questions into the Q&A so we can queue that up for Susie to get into more detail about PQ. We're going to transition now to a presentation that talks about another process that's very complementary to PQ called the ERPD process. And this will be presented remotely. It's a pre-recorded presentation from Dr. Fatima Gruska. But we're pleased that we have Deirdre representing from the PQ team here live so that we can answer any questions about the ERPD process. But I'll hand over to Allison, who's going to play the presentation now. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I am Fatima Grushka, a technical officer working with the WHO pre-qualification team. I'm sorry I could not attend the meeting. I hold a PhD in molecular and cellular biology, and I have an experience in manufacturing and inspecting IVDs. Today, I will be presenting an overview of the Expert Review Panel of Diagnostics and its mechanisms. The Expert Review Panel for Diagnostics, or ERPD, was established based on the experience of ERP for medicine. Since 2014, the Global Fund and UNITED have requested WHO to organize ERPD rounds for specific in vitro diagnostic devices, as procurement agencies and WHO technical programs can only procure IVDs that comply with stringent regulation and WHO policies to ensure they are appropriate for the intended use. The primary goal of the ERPD Review Panel for Diagnostics is to assess the risk and benefit of procuring diagnostic products that have not yet undergone a stringent assessment by WHO pre-qualification or by another stringent regulatory authorities. These products often have a high potential public health impact but have not yet been fully assessed. The products eligible for ERPD evaluation are new in vitro diagnostic devices or technologies with a significant public health impact or in specific settings. These are products that are either under WHO PQ assessment or stringent regulatory assessment but have not completed their review, or for which there is an expression of interest from a procurement agency or technical program. The product must align with the IVD specifications set out by these entities in their call for expression of interest. The panel's role is to provide guidance to procurement agencies and technical programs on whether grant funds should be used for the time-limited procurement of these diagnostics. The ERPD program and assessment is not a replacement for the full WHO PQ or SRA review, but it serves as an important step toward that. It helps to facilitate access to IVDs for neglected diseases or innovative devices when potential benefits outweighs the risks. The application process by the manufacturer starts with the cover letter expressing interest, which is sent to the relevant procurement agency or technical program. Along with this, evidence is required that the product is under review by WHO PQ or SRA, or a letter of commitment from the manufacturer to submit the product for such stringent assessment. The submission must include quality management system documents such as audit reports and certificates. Additional documentation includes details on the product's regulatory version, its design, manufacturing process, quality control, performance specification, labeling, and post-market surveillance. All these elements ensure that the products meet safety and quality standards. The ERP is an independent advisory body coordinated by WHO PQ team. It is composed of external experts from a wide range of fields. These fields include the use of IVDs in health programs in low-income countries, regulatory or clinical affairs, quality management systems, manufacturing and public laboratories. These experts provide an unbiased assessment based on their respective on their respective technical fields. The procurement agency or technical program is responsible for preparing and posting invitations to manufacturers, screening the application and sending them to the WHO PQ team. WHO will assign experts to review these applications, organize EAPD meetings, and finalize the reports. On their side, the EAPD members are selected by WHO PQ team. They assess the data provided in each submissions and draft corresponding reports. Each product is assigned a risk category based on these assessments. EAPD members then present their findings to the WHO PQ team at meetings and provide recommendations on risk mitigation and which product can be considered for time-limited procurement. EAPD reviews may be conducted in pre-planned sessions or ad hoc sessions based on submission from procurement agencies or technical programs. The review focuses on desk review, and the amount of clinical and validation data may vary if the product has not been assessed by a stringent authority. The panel's final conclusion and outcome is a decision on the risk category, which is communicated to the procurement agency and to the manufacturer, taking into account the intended users and set testing environment. The EAPD assigns product to one of four categories. Risk category 1 and 2 permits time-limited procurement by agencies, while category 3 has objection but allows procurement under specific circumstances where the benefit outweighs the risk. Category 4 means procurement is not recommended. So you will find in the two coming slides the detail of the criteria on which are based the risk categorization. You will be able to see the detail as we will be sharing this presentation. So these criteria include evidence of clinical performance, stability studies, labeling, and customer support systems. Product in higher risk category may lack sufficient clinical validation data or have inadequate stability studies, while category 1 products are well supported by clinical and stability data, and labeling adheres to international standards. Risk category assignments are granted for a time-limited period of 12 months. During this time, it is expected that the manufacturer will address the deficiencies identified by the EAPD panel. If progress is made, a one-time extension may be granted along with a new risk category assignment. A new questionnaire with updated evidence will be requested from the manufacturer and shall include post-market surveillance data as well as all updated data for this new application. So in conclusion, the EAPD plays a crucial role in assessing the risks and benefits of diagnostic products that have not yet undergone stringent regulatory assessment, but have the potential for a high public health impact. The expert panel, coordinated by WHO PQ team, conducts a thorough desk review of the quality, safety, and appropriateness of these products. EAPD risk categorization allows for a time-limited procurement with binding condition, ensuring that the manufacturer commits to pursuing WHO PQ or stringent regulatory approval. So thank you for your attention, and my colleagues who are attending will be able to take any question you may have on EAPD mechanism. Thank you.
Excellent. I think that was a really great overview of a very important process that's quite complementary to supporting access. So we'll dig into more questions around DRPD in the Q&A. But one of the important pieces to the regulatory landscape is also how we support access at the national level. And there are a lot of tools and processes as well as experiences that the WHO team can really share about. So we're going to transition now to go over to Dr. Agnes Kijo, who's going to be presenting on the collaborative registration procedure and national registration work that WHO leads. Agnes is a pharmacist, so she's got a lot of experience in this space, and actually worked previously with the African Medical Devices Forum. So Agnes, over to you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. I will put up my slides. Can you confirm if you can see my slides?
Yes.
Excellent. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to present on the work that we do at the Facilitated Products Introduction team. And my presentation picks up very well from especially where Susie Braniff took off. And so left off, sorry, not took off, left off. But before I dive into the slides, there are a few questions that I wanted to pose so you can reflect as I go through the slides. So one of the questions that we usually pose to the regulators is whether the national regulators can be able to assess each and every product that goes into their market. So this is something that we usually challenge the regulators. And of course, as mentioned by Cheryl, that myself, I was a regulator for almost 19 years. So I can understand the challenges in terms of whether there is capacity to assess each and every application that comes to the National Regulatory Authority. But I think the second important question is whether there is any added value in repeating the work that has been done by somebody else. So we like also to pose this question to regulators to say, okay, do you think there is an added value to repeat something that has been done by somebody that you basically trust and you have the same requirements? But I think the third important question is whether there is limited resource, there is resources, adequate resources to support all the assessment work, all the regulatory activities that the regulatory authorities are supposed to take up. And so I think when you think about these questions, that's when facilitated pathways comes in. So the facilitated pathways were developed by WHO, considering the understanding that the NRAs carry great responsibilities in ensuring safety and performance of products. And in most cases, and also based on my experience, national regulatory authorities do not have the responsibility to regulate medical devices only, and for this case, IVDs. They would also have other responsibilities, for example, regulating medicines and vaccines, also in some cases also regulating cosmetics and other products, health products out there. And so you can imagine the burden that the national regulatory authorities carry. And this is why WHO is promoting some specific concepts and strategies and pathways to allow the national regulatory authorities to make smart decisions in terms of leveraging information that is generated by other regulatory authorities. And so if you look at this particular slide, I've indicated what are the facilitated regulatory pathways. So these are pathways that are meant to facilitate or to accelerate registration or regulatory decision for that matter, and then registration of products, and that in turn also supports quick introduction of products in the market. So the idea around facilitated regulatory pathway lies around the concept of reliance, but also it also adopts the concept of risk-based approach, understanding that regulatory authorities at any point may not be able to have all the resources to conduct all the regulatory activities out there. and especially also for market authorization phase, where a product is issued with the initial market authorization, there are several activities that supports that decision, including dossier assessment, performance evaluation. It also includes site audit, and I think all these elements were explained very well by my colleague, Susie. And so to take all that into consideration, we are suggesting to regulators that there is a better way, that there is a smarter way to make that decision based on risk-based approach, which is leveraging on reports that have been of the work that has been done by other national regulatory authorities. So I wanted to introduce a little bit the concept of risk-based approach for the facilitated regulatory pathway. So one of the important consideration or element to consider when you're using risk-based approach is the product type and the complexity. So we advise regulators to say, and I'm just going to give an example of IVDs. For example, IVDs has at least 4 classes. And so question is, do you want to use the same efforts for products that are of lower risk as compared to products which are of high risk? And so this is one of the element that we pose to the regulators, or we suggest to regulators to look into when they are considering the issue of risk-based approach. And then there is an issue also of source of product information. We are going to hear on my other slides, on my next slides, on the source of information, including also a good work that is done by WHO pre-qualification. And so I will speak on the collaborative registration procedure. But we also have products that have been approved by what we call reference regulatory authorities. But at the moment for IVDs, we have not expanded the scope to include this element, but I will also explain further on my next slides. Or if you're considering, for example, to leverage on reports from a country where they no longer, or they don't conduct registration. So what is the source of information? I think it is one of the critical questions that regulators need to ask themselves in order to trust, because the whole concept of reliance is also embedded within the issue of trust, or whether you trust the source of information. So if you trust the source, that means you can easily utilize the information that is being shared by this trusted party. And then the other important element, which I've used it as other factors, is the level of expertise also, and the level of resources. So do you have the resources to conduct each and every element related to initial market authorization? You know, do you have the right expertise? And especially for IVDs, I interact a lot with regulators, and sometimes I realize that the reason why sometimes procedures becomes very lengthy is because of lack of capacity internally. It could be human resource, it could be financial, it could be also capacity, which delays significantly decision making, but also maturity of the regulatory systems. Because when you have a mature national regulatory authorities, the processes are more streamlined as compared to a system where it's not matured. And so expectation is, do you have a mature regulatory system? If not, then you can use any other reliance mechanisms while building capacity internally, and also investing in the regulatory system so that you can be able to pick or to process applications that are submitted. And other factors like public health needs and priorities, but also the possibility to use reliance based on whether this is included in the legal framework. Because if you do not have reliance included in the legal framework, then it becomes difficult to implement. So these are the factors that needs to be looked into by the national regulatory authorities for them to adopt reliance mechanisms. And also, so once you have all these in place, then you have to select the appropriate regulatory pathway. So do you want to use, for example, collaborative registration procedure? Do you want to do recognition? I will explain these concepts on my next slides. or do you want to use any other regulatory pathway that would facilitate decision making? So these are some of the elements that regulators need to consider when applying risk-based approach, such as the facilitated registration pathways that I'm going to present to you. So if you look at this nice diagram here, you see we've put like steps. So there are like 5 pathways that we are recommending for regulators to take. Sorry, I'm looking on the other side. I realized I've put my slides on the other side. So one of them, and I think that maybe the general message on this particular slide is that there is more effort and more work and more resources as the regulators decide to do all the regulatory work by themselves. So if let me start at the top. So if the regulator decides, and this is one of the pathways that regulators may decide to add to utilize. So if one decides, for example, to use their normal national registration pathway, we call it full assessment. So this is where NRIs would conduct all the work from scratch from the beginning. Dossier is submitted, they conduct full assessment of the dossier, they travel abroad, or if it's the manufacturer is within the country, then it's easier. But it involves also traveling to audit sites that are outside their jurisdiction, and also issue of performance evaluations, so fully fledged performance evaluation studies, which have been mentioned by Susie, they will have to be conducted. So question also is whether the country, and especially from low and middle income countries, whether there is capacity also and competency by the labs to conduct such studies. I understand in many settings there is capacity, some level of capacity to assess, but this has to be done within the oversight of the NRI. And then when you go down to joint assessment, this is another facilitated pathway that we recommend to regulators. And this is done by one or two national regulatory authority, two or more national regulatory authority, where they would conduct the assessment together. They will select experts, conduct the assessment together, conduct the audit together, or they may assign one of them to conduct the inspection, and then the report is used for discussion and to make the final recommendation. But this would involve also, resources, would need also expertise in place, etc., and also finances to be able to conduct all this work, because they're done jointly. And then another pathway is work sharing. So work sharing is a pathway where one regulatory authority which is more mature, which is more advanced, is selected by a group of regulators to say, okay, you would help us to review the documents. The applicant will apply in, say, maybe the 6 countries, and then one regulator will be on the steering wheel in terms of assessing the reports, and the reports are shared by the rest. This also requires resources, it requires also time, it requires also expertise. And then there is reliance. So reliance is what we promote, and this is what at the moment I think is the most popular, let me just call it popular, facilitated registration pathway that we encourage regulators to adopt to facilitate decision. And this is where reports from WHO pre-qualification are shared with the national regulatory authorities. So these are full reports, the 3 reports that Susie mentioned, dossier, assessment reports, performance evaluation, site audit report. All these reports are shared with the national regulatory authority through a confidential platform, but after consent of the applicant or WHO pre-qualification holder, because the WHO pre-qualification holder is the owner of the assessment reports. So once we get the consent from the pre-qualification holder, the reports are shared with the NRIs. So the expectation is that once these reports are shared, because it's full assessment reports, So once these reports are shared, we expect the decision to be made within 90 days. And so you can see there is a significant reduction in terms of timelines, but because WHO has already done the major part, so we only require the NRA to conduct what we call abridged assessment, to just look at, the recommendations that have been issued by WHO, and also to look at some specific elements which may have certain provisions in the legislation to monitor the national requirements. And so if there is specific national requirements for specific sections of the report, we also advise regulators to assess those parts. And so these parts could be on the maybe label and labeling information, on the information for use. It could be the issue maybe of stability. So these are some of the areas where we also encourage regulators to check because of the variabilities in these two aspects that I've mentioned. But also, I think the pathway that doesn't use much effort is called recognition. So this is where a final decision issued by either WHO or issued by a reference national regulatory authority is used by the other NRAs to make the decision in terms of issuance of either market authorization or approval for the product to go into the market. So this is a very common and very popular pathway that is used during public health emergencies. Yeah. So these are the 5. Let me just say 4, because the other one we do not really recommend NRAs to conduct full assessment, especially if a product has been assessed by either WHO or other reference national regulatory authorities. So this is in a nutshell what we promote to regulators. But as I said, the most popular and the most interesting pathway is the reliance one, because reports are shared. So at least the regulators will have evidence in terms of the rationale, in terms of the scientific data and the assessment work that was done by WHO. And so we do encourage regulators to use, but I'll also give you numbers in terms of where we are with the implementation of CRP. I'm not going to repeat really much because I've touched already on the reliance concept itself, leveraging information from other trusted organizations in order to improve access. So I'm not going to repeat this one, but I think one of the points that I wanted to raise in this particular slide is where you see all those nice blue oval models on my right side. So these indicate the different regulatory functions. And so we encourage regulators not only to use the reliance on market authorization, but they can use reliance also in other regulatory functions. But in this presentation, we are only talking about market authorization, but it can be applied in all regulatory functions. So collaborative registration procedure, I'm not going to repeat also, I think Susie touched on it. So we are facilitating exchange of information from WHO pre-qualification to the NRA with the consent of the manufacturer. So it's a very simple procedure. And as you see in this slide, so it's the applicant dossier is submitted, same dossier that was submitted to PQ is submitted to country of interest, and then WHO shares the report with the NRAs. Within 90 days, we expect the product to be, at least a decision should be made within the 90 days. And so it really facilitates a decision and faster regulatory decision. I'm not going to go through this. Susie already showed the eligibility of the product, but this is also another diagram that summarizes the collaborative registration procedure. So source of information is WHO, and more specifically WHO PQ. And then documents to be shared are the 3 reports unredacted through a restricted confidential platform. And then expectation now for the different stakeholders, which is the applicant and the NRI, is that we expect the applicant to timely submit the application to the NRIs, and then the NRIs assesses the product within 90 days. But I wanted also to clarify here, it may happen during the assessment, there are questions or there are queries that are being asked to the applicant. And so at this point, we don't count the 90 days. So the 90 days are 90 working days, actually. It's not even calendar days, it's working days. But the assessment clock stops once the query has been sent to the applicant, and once the applicant has responded to the questions, then the clock resumes. And so we don't count the times where the applicant has to respond to the queries. These are the resources that we have. I've provided the link for the resources that you can use. So one is for the collaborative registration procedure for IVDs, and the other one describes good practices. So what are the elements that we recommend to regulators to have in place in order to be able to meet with the timelines of the collaborative registration procedure. And these are the countries. You will be able to see these, to have these countries once the slides are shared. So we have 34 participating NRIs at the moment. You remember, this is a very new procedure as compared to the other CRPs for other medical products. It started in 2019 with a rollout in 2020. And so far, I think we're seeing very good progress in terms of participation. And I've also indicated in this slide products that have been registered so far. So we expect also to see or to receive also requests for the STI Diagnostics. So we had 3 registrations, for example, in 2020, but now we have at least 51 registrations, and we have 67 submissions also in 2024, with a median registration time of 52 working days. Sorry for the error, it's 34, it's not 36, it's 34 participating NRI. So you can see how significantly the registration timeline is reduced when you adopt the collaborative registration procedure. And then in terms of implementation of CRP, I'm not going to go into the details of this, but we have highlighted some of the questions that we normally pose to the regulators to guide them on how they can properly implement the facilitated registration pathways, including CRP. Do you have, for example, a legal framework? Do you have guidelines and policies and regulations that would guide stakeholders on how to implement the collaborative registration procedures? Are there any internal procedures, for example, standard operating procedures to monitor the application so that it doesn't get, lost at some point? And also whether there is plans for adequate training for the regulators. And so this also slide is a busy slide, but it describes the steps. So what are the steps once an NRI has signed the agreement to participate in the collaborative registration procedure? As I mentioned previously, it's very simple, but it is also guided directly by the WHO. I'm not going to speak much, but on the post-approval changes, because this also summarizes the monitoring of post-approval changes both by WHO and the NRI through the collaborative registration procedure. And so one take-home message from my side, and I know my time is up, is to really encourage regulators that the concept of reliance, it doesn't mean that there is lack or undermines the work or capability of the NRI, but it's a smart way to allow National Regulatory Authority to effectively issue regulatory decisions, which I know is usually the biggest pain point for most of the applicants who submit their applications in this for IVDs. So I want to thank everybody for the opportunity once again, and I'll hand over back to Cheryl. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for a wonderful overview of this really important process. We're now just going to go into our last technical presentation, and we're going to hear from one of the leaders of the countries that is taking forward different steps from a regulatory perspective. So over to Dr. Kane Nkuku, who will walk us through a little bit of what SAPRA does. So over to you, Connie.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Please let me know when you can see my slides.
Okay, they haven't come up yet. Okay, looks like they're loading. Perfect, we see them if you want to put them in presenter mode. Excellent, go over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, everyone, for this opportunity to be able to present and provide experiences in terms of an African regulator with the processes from WHO that have already been discussed in detail by the other presenters. So just as background, in terms of low and medium income countries, we do have a frequent demand of pre-qualified products for diagnosis of disease. And mainly the focus on IVDs is for priority diseases that are appropriate for use in resource-limited settings. And for African regulators, the main purpose of WHO PQ is to promote and facilitate access to safe, appropriate, and affordable IVDs that are of good quality and in an equitable manner. Currently, there are more than 10 African regulators that participate in WHO PQ. And furthermore, all the African regulators recognize WHO PQ as one of the recognized processes for importing of IVDs into their countries. And as also stated by Dr. Ignis in her previous presentation, to say that reliance is at the core of more efficient use of global resources. We all know that a lot of the African regulators have really weak national regulatory systems. A lot of the regulators are just starting in terms of regulating IVDs, and therefore the need to facilitate access to quality assured medical products and also to build capacity, noting that there aren't a lot of expertise in these regulators. And also implementation in terms of having voluntary participation, especially in South Africa, we do have a lot of local manufacturers, and therefore, as a regulator, it is important that we support voluntary participation within WHO PQ as well as WHO CRP. And learning by doing, there are training and workshops that WHO does host to capacitate different regulators. And noting that the global regulatory space is evolving, there's globalization of markets, clinical trial programs, there's complexities within supply chains, and also the rapidly evolving of science, and there's this expectation of transparency and also growing public expectations. A lot of the countries, we are applying a risk-based approach where we are trying to avoid duplication where possible, also noted by the previous presenters, whereby we are looking at reliance options such as work sharing, breach pathways. And I know that WHO is also working on having a WHO-listed authorities. Currently, it is not yet finalized for medical devices and IVDs, and I know that it should be coming soon. The use of WHO PQ by African regulators is there to strengthen a lot of the regulatory systems. As mentioned, that a lot of the systems are still in their infancy stages. It is there also to promote reliance and increase effectiveness of the regulation and also efficiencies. It is there to promote an assessment of product safety, efficiency, as well as quality, and also to assist with making quality and regulatory decision-making within our own countries, and also to establish, certain international norms and standards. Furthermore, capacity building and training, and also to speed up the approval processes and fast track the availability of diagnostics for patients within Africa. And also there is a very incredible system, which is the EPQS portal that we have also been using. In terms of the benefit of WHO PQ as well as CRP, as regulators, there's a great opportunity to work with WHO where we can be rotational assessors and also work in terms of the inspections and tag along and learn, and also participate in the training workshops to also improve in terms of capacity building. and also it shortened the approval time. Products that have been approved within 90 days of submission in countries such as Zambia, Tanzania, South Africa, and Kenya, and also optimization of limited pre-market registration resources. There's also product traceability and transparency for buyers, giving the verified sameness between the pre-qualified products as well as the product registered at national level. And these are just a few of the countries that partake within WHO PQ as well as CRP. And a lot of also mentioned by Agnes, where she listed the number of different products that have been WHO approved under the CRP process, where a lot of the African countries took part in to ensure that those products are available within a short period of time in their countries. And most of the African regulators are adopting also the WHO documents within their regulators in terms of the market authorization. For example, within South Africa, we have adopted the table of contents, the technical dossier. We also use the technical specification series, and also encourage our manufacturers within our country and distributors to use the technical guidance series published. In terms of the quality management system, countries such as South Africa have joined MDSAP, whereby we are learning quite a lot, and also we can provide some form of advisory within MDSAP and also advise our manufacturers on quality management system. We've also adopted WHO performance evaluation protocols in terms of in vitro diagnostics and laboratory technology, and guidance for post-marketing surveillance and market surveillance of medical devices, including diagnostics. And the scope of IVD's eligibility for WHO PQ, a lot of the African countries are using a risk-based approach in terms of also looking at the NRA capacity, the scope of IVD medical devices that are selected, comprised of point of care, rapid diagnostics, and they look at the conditions of public health importance. And STI within South Africa specifically is one of, they are part of all the diseases that are of interest, and where we want to ensure that we do have STI diagnostics, that perform accordingly and are available at large within the country. And just to share some successes on WHO PQ, within South Africa, we had the Check Now HIV self-test kit that we were able to work through that. We know that our former country, not former country, but friend country, Zambia, worked on it with WHO PQ that was manufactured by Abbott Rapid Diagnostics. And within South Africa, this product was able to be recognized within 90 days, whereby it was already WHO PQ. And within South Africa, it did not have to go through performance evaluation, and also the optimization of limited pre-market registration resources. The dossier that they had to submit, it did not entail intense in terms of the requirements. So a lot of the technical dossier that they had to submit was waived and limited in terms of the specifications. And there are some challenges as a regulator that we do see, whereby there is information asymmetry between the manufacturers, WHO, as well as the regulators, where the coordination, communication, where there'll be lack of clarity in terms of the procedures and the steps on what manufacturers should follow. And from the country level, we are also working in ensuring that we do exchange information and provide applicants with the correct information, and also, set up meetings where they can be able to get clarity on these specific questions. There's also the challenge of quality of submissions, whereby quality issues are discovered during verification stages. We know that you'll find that the specifications are different from what has been pre-qualified. Submissions of dossiers are incomplete. There's also a lot of discrepancy between the information submitted by the applicant and as well as the one assessed by a Australian Regulatory Authority or through WHO PQ. And we've also noted there's a lot of what applicants will call double standards, whereby we have a different market to international market, and some of these products are not tailored for the African market. For example, self-test kit labeling requirements within South Africa, our regulations do have a few additional information that is required, but in some instances, the manufacturers are not willing to adhere to local requirements. There's also post-approval change management, where the regulator does not receive all the information from the manufacturers themselves. And a lot of the African countries also lack secure information technology systems in terms of information sharing and also management of technical dossiers. There's also lack of assessment strategy and matrix for measuring and documenting the success of an agreement. And there's also resource misfit, which is why we're ensuring that we use the processes from WHO CRP, WHO PQ to ensure that we don't duplicate the work. For example, Zambia has only 2 registration officers. However, they do receive 3 submissions, one point, and are not able to adhere to the timelines. And another real-world experience is in terms of one that was a challenge where the manufacturer had to withdraw, which was the Murex anti-HCV test kit, which was locally manufactured within South Africa, with noting that there are a lot of disparities within the regional and also local regulations. And like I said, lack of communication between manufacturers, the information does not disseminate clearly to the manufacturers, and also in terms of what is required from WHO. And the manufacturer was not able to provide and the ISO 13485 requirements, because to them, implementation of the standard is not just set within South Africa. And therefore, as a regulator, to mediate between this and ensure that they are compliant with WHO PQ requirements was of great importance. And the slide is just to show on certain impacts, themes, as well as the description of the impact and the stakeholder that is impacted. In terms of norms and standards, we have national regulators that are impacted. We also have the manufacturers, whereby the standards will set clear guidance and thresholds to meet in order to assure quality, safe of products. And in some instances, they are not clearly adhered to. And also some manufacturers don't even know where to get this information. And also in terms of regulatory system strengthening, the stakeholder regulators are impacted, as well as patients, whereby we know that WHO PQ is there as a form to provide assistance to regulators in the form of training, support, and tools to enable increased capacity for us to perform as a regulator. And there's also safety and vigilance, where there's a number of stakeholders that are affected, and guidance and support to stakeholders that ensures that products remain of good quality and perform accordingly on the market, and ensure that there is that oversight once they are there on the market as a part of the impact, and also something that needs to be looked at. And a few regional initiatives whereby WHO has PQ, there's quite a lot of opportunities where manufacturers can actually see that it will be coming to effect. In terms of the Africa Medical Device Regulatory Forum, we are looking at having harmonized IVD regulation frameworks, as well as Africa CDC Diagnostic Advisory Committee, looking at having an IVD list throughout Africa that in different jurisdictions they can rely on. We are also looking at having the Africa Collaborative Initiative to Advance Diagnostics, of having centers of excellence as well, whereby we'll be working with different countries. And if a product has already been reviewed by one country, the work does not need to be redone by another country, and also have joint reviews as countries within the different regions, similarly to what is done within medicines, have the same scope for IVDs. And just as a summary in terms of opportunities, where we're looking at developing a list of diagnostics for priority diseases in Africa for evaluation, and WHO pre-qualified diagnostics will also be included within this list. And also establishing an African system under the Africa Medicines Regulatory Harmonization through AMDF for assessment and certification of IVDs according to risk classifications, and also supporting NRAs to register diagnostics recommended by AMDF, by WHO PQ processes, and create a list of an African Union suitable certified diagnostics, and also mapping, identifying, capacity building of a network of accredited laboratories for validation of IVDs, and also supporting development of a robust peer-reviewed protocols for independent verification of IVD performance that will support the African regulatory decisions of different countries. And also we're looking at promoting an African Union procurement mechanism for priority diagnostics within Africa. And lastly, supporting the existing efforts in creation of an enabling environment for local manufacturing of diagnostics within Africa, and hopefully in partnership with WHO regarding all of this. And for recommendation from a regulatory point of view, we're looking at ensuring that there is communication about the added benefits, as well as increased best practice sharing by WHO pre-qualification team, and also with the CRP process. As noted before, initiation of work sharing initiatives among the NRAs, such as Zazibona, the East African team, as well as continentally with the Africa Medical Device Forum, and regular exchange of information and knowledge, and also strengthening formal procedure to collect input from NRAs on the local unmet needs of the different diagnostic and also priority diseases for different African countries. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Connie. And I just want to thank all of our speakers who've really covered a lot of great content. And thank you to all of those who've been responding to the queries in the chat. Just to kick off the Q&A, we don't have too much time, but we wanted to go to one of the questions, which was about, can manufacturers apply for ERPD at any time that they meet the requirements, or only if there is a window open for a particular type of test? Does ERPD publish a list of IVDs that are cleared for use? So Deirdre, maybe over to you if you wanted to speak to that.
Thanks, Cheryl, and thanks for the great presentations. So with regard to ERPD, and specifically in this context of STIs, so there isn't a ERPD open for STIs at the moment. And as Fatima described, it would be hosted and ideally by the WHO program or procurement agency. To be honest, there's different ERPD invitations out there. So there was a little bit of a side discussion in the chat. There's some procurement agencies who have invitations for expressions of interest, like the Global Fund, which is on a rolling basis. So manufacturers can apply at any time that they're ready. There's other cases, like recently this year, we've had a pilot ERPD for neglected tropical diseases, which was just a window. So manufacturers had to submit their ERPD application and questionnaire by a deadline. And some of these might hold an additional round, but it really depends on the funding and capacity, and also the outcome of this ERPD round, if they have if they're happy with the number of IVDs that have been assessed and the risk categories. With regard to the question about whether you can apply for ERPD when you have met the criteria, just to make clear, for ERPD, we don't have requirements, as Susie described, for pre-qualification. So the TSS documents that we should be publishing for public comment later this year, they are not the requirements for ERPD, they're the requirements for pre-qualification. And just to reiterate, where we think ERPD can be a good interim measure is for manufacturers who are not quite there with regard conducting and generating all the analytical and clinical performance studies and evidence for PQ, but who are in the process of generating this data and are applying to and that's really the opportunity to apply for ERPD. Cheryl, I hope I answered those questions.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. And I
Right.
think we have time just for one more question, and I want to open this to all the speakers. Really just to say, in what ways is STI regulatory different from other diagnostics? So Susie, I don't know if you maybe want to start us, but I just open it up, to everyone on the call who may want a final word on this.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. So for STI Diagnostics, there isn't really a difference in the way we approach it in pre-qualification. We follow our same method where we've spoken to a lot of different stakeholders and experts in that particular area so that we can figure out what are the requirements that let us know whether a product is of good quality, and we're confident that it will perform out in the field the way the manufacturer describes. I guess if we want to speak more at a higher level, perhaps in the STI field, traditionally there hasn't been the same level of regulatory oversight for these products as there have been for things like HIV, Hep C, that kind of thing. So that often means manufacturers have not had the same experience of putting together a product dossier to show the performance of their product against particular requirements. And to try and address that, that's partly why we're having this webinar today. But also we are trying to have a lot of information available on our website to answer questions that manufacturers might have if this is their first experience of putting together this kind of information to undergo an assessment. But happy for anyone else from the panel to jump in and add their opinion. Thank you.
Agnes, go ahead.
Yes, very briefly, just to support what Susie has just said. So it's the same also from the regulatory space. As long as the product has been pre-qualified, we welcome applicants to submit for and test the collaborative registration procedure. I think it's a very effective way to introduce products. You use the same WHO dossier, the dossier that was submitted to WHO, and so less work in terms of organizing the technical file. So is the same. So please apply for collaborative registration procedure once these important innovative products have been pre-qualified. Thank you.
Great. And I don't think we have time for another comment, but I did just want to note that sometimes at the national level, the classification of medical devices can vary. So D versus C. So that's just something to look at the local policies as well. So on that note, I want to just thank everybody and hand over to Lori, who's going to close us out. Lori, over to you.
Great. I just want to thank everybody who participated, and just to the speakers say, I mean, I think it attests to the volume of interest in STI diagnostics to note that over 40 participants joined today. And I think what's really important is that, the foundation is looking for ways that we can catalyze development of these new STI diagnostics. How can we make it as easy as possible? We heard from Agnes and Connie about the opportunities to streamline, in addition to the WHO pre-qualification process that Susie described so nicely, there are opportunities to make this more streamlined through the ERPD and the CRP processes. So we're looking forward to helping work with partners like WHO and AVAC to see what information, how can we best disseminate information about these opportunities? How do we, and Agnes listed a list of opportunities that I hope some of us can take a peek at and really think through, because it goes beyond STI diagnostics as well. There may be things across ways that, and Agnes's list of opportunities is a great way to be thinking about how can we do this for diagnostics broadly as well, and be thinking about regional initiatives to streamline and avoid wasted effort. So stay tuned, stay in touch. We will try and make sure that the link to this webinar and some summary notes are made publicly available as soon as possible. Stay in touch with AVAC, and we'll keep working with you all to see what we can do to make these products available for women and men and individuals around the world as soon as possible. So thank you so much.
Great. What a great word to end on, Lori. And I just want to take the opportunity to give a final thank you to our tremendous speakers coming from all different parts within WHO and from the National Regulatory Authority in South Africa. We are so grateful for your collaboration and for all your leadership in this space. Having this access to diagnostics is just so critical to our work. We also want to just thank AVAC, Mitchell Warren, Allison Footman, Jason, who was supporting us as well, and the whole AVAC team. And then last but not least, we want to thank the foundation as well, who's really supporting this area. Really important to have your engagement. And as you said, Lori, it's really about getting the access to individuals at the end of the day who need these tests. So thank you, everybody. And we look forward to being back in touch. And we look forward to any questions that come later. The slides will be circulated. The links will be posted. And any question that was asked in the pre-submission form that we didn't get to, we're going to circulate to the speakers to give comments to, so we can get that back to everybody as well. So thank you and have a good rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.